Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a returning guest, a very special guest. We've done many shows. We actually go back 10 years. I did an interview with him, Prophet of Evil, 10 years ago. He goes by JJ or Vallibus. And about a month ago, we talked about a interesting so-called science fiction short by Arthur C. Clarke titled The Sentinel. So you can check that out. And next month, we are going to cover an Isaac Asimov book, the first of the Foundation series, of The Foundation. So if anybody wants to read along with that or is curious about that book and wants to join a discussion of that, that would be great. But tonight we're going to talk about something we chatted about a little bit, which is the faked moon landing, something that I really didn't believe could be faked. But I've done some reading. I reread the great Dave McGowan's Wagging the Moon Doggy, which you can see on Vimeo right now. I will put the link up to Wagging the Moon Doggy, which is a 14-part series at the reformed Dave McGowan website, the Center for an Informed America. So I highly recommend people go check that out. And also Massimo Mazzucco's very long, 3.5-hour, very thorough documentary titled American Moon. So I highly recommend people check that out. But Vallibus is also going to talk about the background that led up to the moon landings in the Apollo 11, very strange number as well. But JJ can talk more about that. So JJ, are you there?
Well, Mr. William Ramsey, I'm right here. I appreciate the invite and great talking to you again here today.
Yeah, it's always worthwhile for me. So I'm really delighted that you agreed to the interview. For people who may not know your background, can you talk about kind of your knowledge and some of the background about the moon landings and the occultism and just the high strangeness involved in what happened leading up to Apollo 11?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of, to the audience, it may seem like this is a different thread of discussion than, be it Arthur C. Clarke or Isaac Asimov, or the rest of the little science fiction, Thelmite Science Fiction Writers Club. But it's the same conversation, because those same science fiction writers did the play-by-play on the broadcast live TV of the Apollo 11 moon mission. Right. So what qualifications they had, I'm not sure, other than writing fictional stories about space. But they were the ones that were chosen to be the with Walter Cronkite on the TV doing a live play-by-play of the Apollo 11, launch.
Walter Cronkite, who was the voice for the cremation of care at the Bohemian Grove, right? That Walter Cronkite?
Exactly. The same Walter Cronkite, right? So, and there's an interesting occult background, I think, around all of these things. Before the Apollo missions, obviously proceeding and building up to it, and even since then. And I've had to really reanalyze my look on space in recent years, and in large part, it was Dave McGowan's Wagging the Moon Doggy that caused me to do that. Because I have a family that's deeply ingrained in NASA.
Gotcha. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So my grandfather, at least, I going to be my grandfather, but it's definitely of relations to me, according to a recent DNA test that I had to do and find out that my family is not necessarily my family that I thought they were. But that man was a NASA engineer for many years. I mean, one of the original engineers, one of the primary contractors for NASA. So he worked a lot of NASA projects. He's credited with the fixing the Hubble telescope, whatever that means. I guess the Hubble telescope had a lot of problems in the 1970s. And as a result of that,
they just fixed it again, right? I don't know if you watched it.
I got stalled, and he got brought into the project to be the Mr. Fix-It engineer. Yep. Yeah, I think they have to do that ever since then, because they have to have an excuse to dedicate money. So right. I don't know. I don't exactly know what that means to have the nod of the accomplishment of fixing the Hubble telescope, but that is of my immediate family, and also the man I grew up to be knowing as my uncle, who's apparently really my father. He was a director of NASA's security at the Ames Research Center.
Gotcha. So you definitely have
Silicon
that pedigree,
Valley,
right?
California.
Yeah.
And I didn't know him. He died. He passed before I was born.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I was raised in a family that obviously space is real. So when I discovered things like Wagging the Moon Doggy, it was quite an eye-opening experience for me.
Yeah, he actually writes in Wagging the Moon Doggy that he was taking a break from writing weird scenes And so it was kind of a distraction for him. He had writer's block. But it is interesting because one of the interesting things that McGowan did is juxtapose the moon landing that happened, I think, in June 1969 with the real high weirdness of that era. I think the Manson murders were one month later. And so he
No, you're right.
Yeah, and so he
went through the whole chronology.
Right. And so he really
Absolutely.
Right. So he had, I think he showed that this was a very important public event to raise spirits during Vietnam War and all this stuff. So it was a very important element in kind of public relations and lifting people's spirits to have this event happen.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Dave McGowan was spot on with, oh, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. But yeah, I totally agree. The David McGowan even includes sources for all these items, and he does juxtapose it with the chronology of the events that were taking place. So yesterday was July 16th. 52 years ago from yesterday was the Apollo 11 moon launch. Now, obviously there was a number of years building up to the Apollo 11 moon mission, the first landing on the moon, alleged landing on the moon. And all of those missions preceding it were just complete and utter failures.
Right. And I mean,
watching some of the videos that are still available, even I think on NASA's website, is laughable.
Right. And and the supposed Apollo 11 had the most rickety joke level technical stuff, and they were just going to wing it because all the other ones were failures. So you're right. It's very shocking that they would take this massive risk to supposedly send these people to, and they actually show in Mizuko's film, American Moon, they show how the Russians really thought they were going to try to get to the moon and failed over and over again. There are all these explosions. So the U.S. was really washing the Russians, and the Russians just gave up. They didn't continue, but something happened with on the way to the moon with the Americans that was much different.
Sure. And I think, again, back to Dave McGowan's work, when he's showing how that some of these moon missions were taking place in distraction of things like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, I think that's a good indicator of the next concept I want to introduce, and that is there's not a lot of these things are not different conspiracies. It's the same conspiracy. They just keep trying to clean up each mess in each subsequent mess after that. For example, the reason the Apollo program existed in the first place is because JFK decided he needed to make a speech and force that situation.
Right. So he really committed to it, right? So
a decade in advance, basically.
Right. Yeah. But so they couldn't really fail. They couldn't fail because it would be a diminution of the American system, really. So they put a lot of risk in, and it was really Kennedy who, wisely or unwisely, and there's that famous speech, "We will be in the moon by the end of the decade," right? So they put all that money in there. They definitely were spending the money to do it. It's really incredible. And I want to just quote this one thing from the intro to McGowan Center for an Informed America. It's from Werner von Braun, right? The paper-clipped literal Nazi. I forgot if he was a colonel, but he definitely had, he was a member of the Nazi military.
Major.
Yeah, major.
He was a major. Yep. SS.
And right. So he was an SS guy, and I think the place was called Peenemünde, and they literally had slaves that were murdered. So people were it was a slave camp. People were getting dead, literally where he was going. And I think he infamously stated in very dry terms, "I shot for the moon and hit London," right? German humor.
Sure. Absolutely.
So, but here's a quote from, and this is from a book called Conquest of
every day they would kill the slowest people from the day before.
Yeah, no, it was bad. So he definitely got washed of a lot of criminality. And there were a lot of Nazi scientists in the whole rocket program. It wasn't just him. But I want to just quote this if I can. It's this is from Werner von Braun, follower of the Apollo space program, from McGowan's work, Weighing the Moon Doggy. It's, quote, "It is commonly believed that man will fly directly from the Earth to the moon, but to do this, we would require a vehicle of such gigantic proportions that would prove an economic impossibility. It would have to develop a sufficient speed to penetrate the atmosphere and overcome the Earth's gravity, and having traveled all the way to the moon, it must still have enough fuel to land safely and make the return trip to Earth. Furthermore, in order to give the expedition a margin of safety, we would not use one ship alone, but a minimum of 3. Each rocket ship would be taller than the New York's Empire State Building, and weigh about 10 times the tonnage of the Queen Mary, or some 800,000 tons.
Wow. So basically impossible is what he's trying to say there.
Right. And
I mean, the year of that quote was what, man?
I don't know when the conquest of the moon was done, but it probably was before. Maybe? Yeah, probably. And an interesting kind of aside, I've actually looked through.
It was definitely
collection,
mid 50s.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've looked through Werner von Braun's documents and a lot of his calculations. The guy was a genius. I mean, they were doing heavy-duty calculus without computers or any kind of computational device to do the moon rocket stuff before the 60s. I mean, it's off the charts with how smart Werner von Braun was. So, but anyway, there's all kinds of information in both Wagging the Moon Doggy and American Moon that would be worthwhile to people, because I'm totally convinced it's totally fake. But
if I can frame the Apollo missions, the faked Apollo. Oh, I agree. It was hard for me to reach that conclusion as well, because again, not my upbringing at all, etc. And again, they did such a great job with the propaganda involved that it's hard to reach that conclusion. But people have been questioning since the 60s, since it occurred, since immediately after its occurrence, maybe 1971 or 72, I think was the first kind of they faked the moon landing, book. But in relative to the Nazis and Werner von Braun's statement that you just quoted, he makes that statement. Kennedy then commits the Nazis to landing on the moon. When I say the Nazis, that is NASA. I mean, NASA is comprised of overwhelmingly Nazis, especially at that time. So much so that the director, I believe it was the Johnson Space Center there in Houston, during the Apollo time of the 1960s, he came to work in his SS officer's uniform. They had no problem with that. And these are the same people that Kennedy was already combating in a sense, because some of the people, as you stated, that whitewashed the Project Paperclip Nazis and that whole program, that's the Dulles brothers, Alan Dulles and James Foster Dulles there.
John Foster, yeah.
John Foster Dulles. So, those guys are the same ones that Kennedy's firing from. They're the one they're trying to stoke Vietnam War in 1952, 1953. Right. So, and he's the same. They're the same ones he's firing from the CIA, leadership in 62. So, these are obviously people that are opposed to Kennedy in some form or fashion.
Right. So Kennedy dies November 22nd, 63. Vietnam takes off, and right in kind of the same parameters, or the same
January of 64. Lyndon Johnson signs the order, sends, I think, 2 main troops.
Yep, that was it.
Yeah, and on top of that, everyone involved in the Kennedy assassination is intertwined with these ancient alien cultist people. These no different than I don't know if these people were Thelemites, but they're of the same milieu, they're the same ilk. If you're familiar with the story of the Nine, in the seance with the U.S. Army weapons captain trying to weaponize, he wrote a paper trying to weaponize ESP and stuff like that in the 1950s, maybe 1950, we'll call it 1954. So in 9 years later, the same people that are on that seance are all surrounding the JFK assassination, to the point where all of the evidence produced for Lee Harvey Oswald comes from that group. That same group also got Lee Harvey Oswald the job at the depository. Book depository.
Right. It was a piece or something. I forgot, the husband and wife team, and then you have Vaughn. I mean, you have all these crazy.
It was Arthur Young, and Arthur Young was his daughter, and that's where Marina Oswald was staying. I believe that was the man's name. He's big in the aerospace industry. I believe the inventor of the Bell helicopter, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. And Puharich,
his daughter was housing. Yeah. Puharich was the Army captain, correct? Yep. And so that's the guy who also goes to start Stanford Research Institute, which is deeply involved with Scientologists.
Right.
So these are the same groups. They're not different stories. They're not like separate stories. They're the same people doing the same things. And in the 1960s, they were heavily focused on selling everybody the Apollo moon missions, but the people that Kennedy had put on the clock to go to the moon are the same people that killed Kennedy, essentially. I mean, that's how the record states, at least. Because again, Oswald wouldn't have had the job. nor would he had the evidence submitted, the false evidence submitted, the doctored evidence of the fake photographs and stuff like that. Oh, well, I have these photos, she was like, oh, she told the Dallas police, this is how the story goes. I can't recall her name. She later testified in the Warren Commission and in a NBC fake, court hearing against Oswald.
Right. So it's just incredible that it all intertwines, right?
So, these people, they don't relent.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's incredible that they can keep it
goes on for years to years and years, and seems to. Yeah, I think it speaks to a lot of the propaganda and the quote unquote magic, because they'll all say that they're magicians, correct? Right. All these Thelemite type of cultist people.
I'm pretty sure weren't the three guys, the astronauts, Armstrong and what were the three? Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins. Wasn't one or two of those Masons? My memory serves me correct.
I believe they all were.
They all were Masons, right?
I believe they all were. Yeah, but if you look at all the Nazi guys involved, including Werner von Braun, the other SS officers involved, they're all the Thule Society. That's some strange belief systems. Right. And they're going to call themselves magicians as well.
Right, they're Atlanteans. That's what the whole Thule goes back to.
Right.
Yeah, so it's incredible. And I think what's also interesting, I mean, there's so many points that Mizuko makes in his film, but one of the interesting things is how the three so-called astronauts on really an epochal mission, the first human being to reach the moon, how miserable they all were and how fake they were. They're just off the charts.
Oh, absolutely. It's it's kind of like watching something from the 1970s or 1980s now. It was broadcast or filmed then versus what we have for crisp HD 1080p pictures on our current broadcast of TV or media. And you can compare to, and you can see, well, that looks totally different. But at the time, it looked good. It looked real. It looked like a good picture. And that's so different with the moon landings. At the time, they sold it good. They did a really good job selling it. Just ever since then, I'm not sure what their plan was, years down the road, but obviously that was not going to look good, today when we can, folks can analyze every video clip and see how fake it looks from not only the parts and pieces that they're using, but the storyline in which they claim to have, accomplished.
Right. So at some point during that whole moon mission, they realized they couldn't get it, and then everything changed. They took that same amount of money to perfect the stage show, right? So something
Correct.
happened. Yeah. So that was really it. So I think McGowan says that Werner von Braun.
And I don't think if you agree with me, I don't think they wanted to do it, right? That's, I guess, I'm long-winded. My long-winded point is they didn't want to do it.
They didn't want to fake
JFK
it.
Put them up to it.
Oh,
no, I'm saying they didn't want to be involved in the Apollo missions at all. That was not what the Nazis and NASA had planned at the time, right? Because they got, it seems to me that they were put up to the task by Kennedy.
Right. And as a result, what would Kennedy's point be? Didn't you think that he really wanted to achieve that great feat?
No, I don't suspect that was probably his goal. No.
So what do you think it was?
It seems to be some sort of occulted war between different factions.
Cool. That's interesting. So why didn't they just say they couldn't make it and just give up?
Adamantly opposed. They don't, well, Nazis are the least of which of people to want to lose face like that, lose respect like that in light of the general public, especially in society. So I think that was in large part what it was, because I think at one point in time they probably were trying to accomplish something. But again, if you look at the early rocket launches they have out of El Paso, Texas and stuff, they literally bombed in Mexico. I mean, they weren't accomplishing anything. Right. So
I mean, the other incredible thing
once they came to that failure, then as I see it, they went and they found a filmmaker.
Right.
Go ahead.
They definitely found a filmmaker. They probably got insights from the concurrent making of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which came out the same year, which a lot of people overlook in the entire moon is a hoax thing, and nobody mentions 2001, but it's a really important piece of the puzzle, because
absolutely,
they were in contact. They called Kubrick's studio, NASA East, and there's pictures of Kubrick, Clark, and Mueller, who was like a big wig at NASA, all together hanging out. I mean, it's very telling. Like, what is this creative person doing with a guy from NASA? Why are they hanging out together? and all those things.
Right.
And he was
No.
loaned heavy duty, really high tech, and Kubrick knew how to use it, high tech instrumentation and lenses and things like that for his cameras that really nobody had ever seen up to that time.
Oh, I mean, it was filmmaking, breakthroughs he was doing, and with the new cameras that NASA bought him that he could have never afforded. That's on record. They bought him a camera. That's on record, as you stated, that they were visiting his studio in the months preceding Apollo 11 launches. The Apollo 11 launch, that they should be focused on that, assumingly, right? They shouldn't be at some filmmaker studio in London, England. And then on top of that, Werner von Braun at the same time is taking trips to Antarctica.
Right.
So are they really?
Right. And the point of the Antarctica trip is that's where all the moon rocks are from the repeated comet hits to the moon. They end up down there. So then they can fake it. So they have actual moon rocks. And some of the Dutch, the moon rock is fake. There's so many problems with the story that it's just falling apart. Even Mythbusters.
That's one of my favorite stories of the Dutch moon rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if they're really serious about going to the moon, why are they visiting Stanley Kubrick's studio in London in the preceding months? Why are they buying him a camera? Why is von Braun in Antarctica? And you're spot on with your analysis with 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is overlooked.
I mean, it pulls it all together.
And,
because this Food Odyssey, if you remember, JJ, the most important part of 2001 is them going to the dark side of the moon to find the Sentinel obelisk, whatever, Ashlar. So that's really crucial. So they're faking the moon at the same time NASA's faking the moon.
Correct. And I think one of the other big takeaways from 2001 is this. They implanted in everyone's mind that astronauts move very strangely in space by a very slow movement and a very kind of bouncy movement, but they're not weightless. Like they're, you know what I mean? There's clearly there seems to be so involved in what we're watching there, but without the idea implanted in 2001: A Space Odyssey that this is how people move in space. When NASA did it, within the following year, there, everyone already thought that's how people move in space. No one's going to question why are these Apollo astronauts for the next few years are doing these films on the 6 or 7 landings on the moon. They do the films where they're all kind of just jumping around. I think they played golf.
Right.
I think they played golf on one of the later missions. Right. But the idea of how these people, the physics of how they move on the moon was implanted in 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Right. Like, so they're moving them together in tandem to influence people's mind. And Mazuka does a really good job of showing these guys moving in ways that aren't plausible unless they're tied up to some kind of rig or something like that. They fall over.
Oh yeah,
it's just
absolutely
ridiculous. And the way that the dust moved was improbable too. I mean, there's supposed to be no water on the moon, but it moves in ways that has to congeal with some type of liquid. I think there's just all kinds of problems. Now, somebody asked in the chat why the Soviets wouldn't expose it. Mazuko goes into that in American Moon. He says that there were other arrangements going on with the Russians and the U.S., and so if they would have come out and say everything you've done is fake, those arrangements would be curtailed or strained. So this kind of detente that was trying to take place in the 60s would have been risked by the Russians or the Soviets really exposing the problems with the American.
Sure, that could have been a factor. I look at it like this, though. They're the same group. Right. Oh, I didn't mean to walk on you there. We had a delay.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I agree. That could be a factor. But I look at it like this. It's the same group. We can call them the Soviet moon missions versus the U.S. moon missions. It's the same Nazis. Some Nazis went to the Soviets. Some Nazis went to the U.S. And no one in the U.S. was monitoring their communications, believe it or not, according to FBI documents available on the FBI vault that says that that these Nazis in El Paso, for example, were allowed to roam off base and communicate with whomever they wanted to unabated. So these are the Project Paperclip Nazis, which I've been getting more interested in, because when I did a DNA test, I had a cousin contact me saying, "How are we related?" And I said, "I have no idea." And her father is extremely German. I'm, to the best of my knowledge, not German at all. And that man came here via Project Paperclip with his father, a Nazi scientist. So I don't know. That's still a big question mark. But I had a cousin write me, and she's just as confused as I am. But yeah, so these Project Paperclip folks, I've been forced to look more into that program since then, and learning that information, then they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to, and they were writing their friends in the Soviet Union. I mean, that's on record. And again, right. It's often sold to the general public as two different groups, but most people don't know that the U.S. missions with the Soviets to space started in 1972, 73, and they go on today. We don't launch manned missions from the U.S. anymore. We haven't in over 40 years. They all launched from Russia.
Right.
Including, to the best of my knowledge, the International Space Station missions.
Well, do you know that it's never been reported?
The space station they launched from Russia.
Other than I think Hubble, which is 400 miles above the Earth, no other nation has passed beyond that barrier other than supposed moon landing. So in all this time, 50 years, that's never happened, and they never explained the Van Allen belts, which were recently discovered, I think in the 50s or 60s, and how, I mean, the radiation would have destroyed film. It would have destroyed all kinds of stuff. And that really rickety supposed moon lander is actually a joke. If you really look at it. And I think that McGowan makes a hysterical point, because like when they just brought out this rover that could not have fit in there, like where's the gas? Where's the engine? There's all kinds of structural problems, and all that stuff has disappeared. So all of that information on this most epochal event is all gone. The designs are destroyed. And you know what their excuse was? It was too big to store. So that's a joke, because if you know anybody in a librarian, that's never stopped them from, in any library, there would have been something at the Smithsonian who would have taken all that information. So they had really bogus excuses for why they don't have them. I can tell you
firsthand experience, that's a ridiculous story.
Yeah. So the radiation problem,
we just keep walking on each other. I apologize there. Yeah, all their stories are ridiculous. If you look at anything they say, NASA says, if you try to question the Van Allen radiation belt or the distances or anything else like that, or the fuel that was going to be required to go to the moon, etc., they just their answer is, well, you start putting things under microscopes, nothing is going to make sense. Essentially that's their position. And in recent years, they've actually produced actual video clips on YouTube saying, if we want to go back to the moon, we got to build a new, everything from scratch. Why in the world would you have to do that?
Right. And all of the electronics were basically less powerful than your standard phone. So, I mean, there's all kinds of problems.
Yeah, NASA saves everything, because they like to say they don't, but I can assure you they do. I was involved in a project for a private company working security for them, and they were attempting to build an automobile with a Stirling engine. It's an old technology, but in the early 1980s, actually 1978, Jimmy Carter assigned to NASA. He said, NASA, you're not going to space anymore. Then you guys need to go solve the fuel crisis. Back when everyone was lining up to get fuel, there was a fuel crisis of the 1970s.
Right. So
Jimmy Carter's solution was build better automobiles to get better fuel mileage. So he set NASA on that task. They actually did. They built a 100-mile-per-gallon automobile. It runs on regular fuel on an old 200-year-old technology called a Stirling engine, and then it was buried in a NASA warehouse for nearly 25 years. And I was in that position of security of that organization that failed in their endeavors to bring it to market. We actually had to finally get the engine out of the warehouse. But for years, NASA claimed we don't have that engine. The original engine from the original.
Oh, there's been massive cover-ups in the auto industry. They had a carburetor, high-end. It
turns out they did.
I mean, it's just the whole thing. When you really look at it, one of the interesting things that Mizuko does at the end of his documentaries, he gets these other modern photographers and cinematographers to look at the lighting, and they're just like, "Hey, that's a serial movie light. I know that. I know where that lighting's coming from. There's two kinds of shadow here. This light is just off the screen. It's coming from the opposite of the sun. There shouldn't be any light on the other side of the lander. Like, you only have or light coming from one direction, but somehow there's this, mystery light coming from somewhere else." So once you really start analyzing it, it's fake, baby. It's totally fake.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and that American Moon documentary does, and so does Wagging the Moon Dog. He does do a good job at analyzing some of those very technical aspects of the lighting and everything else as well. Because I don't think they thought about it. That's what I'm saying. It was such an ad hoc mission to make this thing happen because of the clock they were put on by Kennedy, et cetera, and whatever else was going on outside the public purview in that situation, that they had to do this. And the manner in which they did it was ad hoc. It wasn't expecting, they didn't have time. They didn't have the ability to think, well, what's going to happen in 30 years? And what's going to happen in 30 years when people can analyze this better on better, video technology, et cetera. And then I think that's why it's so messed up, because people often wonder and ask, at least in conversations I've had on the subject, well, why do they do it so sloppy? Well, I mean, they did it the best of their ability, given their time and factors they had available. That's kind of
once they committed to it, right? And I also kind of see the death of, what was the guy's name, and they died in the compartment, probably as kind of a cover-up because of his fake. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Gus Grissom.
Gus Grissom, thanks. Yeah.
Yep. There's an Air Force base named after him in Indiana, Grissom Air Force Base.
And those guys, I think they showed in Mazuko's movie, there was a guy named Bart Sibrel who confronted Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins and said, "Can you swear on a Bible that you went to the moon?" And no three of them would take it. They couldn't put their hand on it and say, "We went to the moon." I mean, it's incredible. Like, they just couldn't even say that
right.
for one reason or another.
Not only could they not do that, not only that, Aldrin punches him out, doesn't he?
Yes, they show him just knocking him.
So it's interesting with Armstrong, though, because Armstrong took a different approach in life. You see Buzz Aldrin kind of being the Hollywood kind of guy, running around saying, "I landed on the moon," and making a lot of money from it. But Armstrong didn't do that.
Right.
He was a professor at the University of Cincinnati for the rest of his life and lived in seclusion.
Well, it was right around that time after the landing.
In the wealthy suburb of Cincinnati.
Right.
Until
and that's
right.
And that's around the time that Kubrick became a shut-in. So Kubrick ends up staying in London and doesn't want to ever leave. So, like, something happened.
Right. I agree. And when you say Kubrick became a shut-in, like, he took it to a new level, though. He built a moat.
Yeah.
He built a moat around his house.
Didn't come back to the U.S. Didn't want to come back to the U.S. All kinds of weird stuff about that.
I know, but I'm excellent. I'm an expert in security, but I've never once considered building a moat around my own home.
Yeah, the whole thing is really weird. And that's probably why they, did that guy in, was because it was assigned to everybody else. We can off you. You better go along with us. We're all Masons.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, Kubrick was in the club, I think, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think so.
I think there's varying degrees of being in the club, obviously, and it's a spectrum, and he's in the club to a certain extent, and he had a certain knowledge of some activities and may have thought some things were going one way, and he found out they were going a different. And because I think a lot of what he did later in his career there with The Shining was, there's a great theory that a lot of these ideas encoded in The Shining that he faked the moon mission.
Right. There's like,
are you familiar with that?
Yeah, the sweater on the little kid. It says Apollo.
He's wearing the Apollo 11 moon sweater. Yeah.
So it's all in there, and then he finalizes his career with Eyes Wide Shut, which is totally Masonic occult stuff.
And I think a lot of the Eyes Wide Shut stuff is stuff that he may have experienced himself in New York City.
Right. That makes sense.
Because he's not from that. He wasn't necessarily from the club. He got introduced into the club when that's kind of how.
Yeah. Through Art Clark. Right.
It's kind of autobiographical of sorts.
I would say so. I mean, I think the themes are there. And Ziegler, his name is Bricklayer in German. It's all Masonic.
Oh, very much so. And again, I think he was Masonic. I don't know that for a fact, but he's got a lot of Masonic ideas in a lot of his films and whatnot, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, no, it's really, if you look at the real history, the occulted history, it's the true history, not this kind of nonsense that we actually made it to the moon. And then you throw in the magic. How do they timed it to make sure the first moon landing was the Apollo 11. I mean, it's just off the charts. So you got the number of magic, you throw that into the 11-foot tall, ashlar monolith in Apollo in 2001. Then you throw in the first flight of the 11 in 2001 so-called terrorist attack, and you just see the real undergirding of this occultism, Western esotericism. It's all
sure.
there.
Yeah, the occult. I think, you're right. The occult undertones that are erupting to the surface. I think you're spot on because, years after the events you just stated in the 60s, Buzz Aldrin's selling a story that there's an obelisk on Mars, on the moon of Mars. So they're still selling the same ideas. He's the Apollo 11 astronauts, the same people. Decades subsequent to the events. And I don't know why they do it necessarily. I mean, I don't know what motivates these people to do these things, but clearly what they're doing is deception. But that's the root of their philosophies, right? I mean, Thalima's philosophy is, and most of these other magicians are chaos and deception, right?
Right. And I do think that Clark and Kubrick were pretty dark when they threw in the monolith in 2001 and made it an evolutionary thing. So they're actually pushing evolution as this occult evolution. And I mean, it gets super deep. Like that means, I mean, it kind of intimates that evolution itself is an occulted idea, which is really dark.
Right.
And it's actually kind of interesting because it ties in. I was watching Chinatown, and they have the first depiction of a smiley face killing death, a water death of somebody drowned in water, moved. And then Houston says, this guy said that pool is really where life started. It's the most incredible. And that screenplay for Chinatown won Academy Award. But go back and watch Chinatown, and you'll see the SFK, and then the guy Houston, this kind of dark character who's probably involved with people around the Black Dahlia killing and all this stuff, says, "Oh yeah, evolution's incredible. It really is evolution. That's where we started." So you see them pushing that. It's pretty fascinating.
Oh yeah, that's a great movie. Mulroy was the character, the water guy,
yes.
The water engineer for the city, was the guy that was killed. Yeah, and you're right. That is, they killed him in one body of water and dumped him into different and try to make it look like he drowned.
Right. And that was the key. That was the key of Nicholson's character. Is like, I figured it out.
That's a very interesting movie though, because if you look at the people involved in it, it's a Polanski film starring Jack Nicholson and directed by Bob Evans. And all of these people are of the same, again, I'll use the word milieu or ilk, the same occult organizations or groups of the rest of these Thelemite science fiction writers, the same occulted groups of the Nazis, etc. And, most of these groups they all have their starts with Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society in the 1800s, mid to late 1800s. So they all have similar theologies as a result of that.
And you see that you're right, and it's there. And so you see the pedophilia, the incest, the same themes in Chinatown, Eyes Wide Shut. It's really dark. It's probably the most stuff imaginable. Anyway,
that's what Chinatown's maybe 71 or 72 maybe.
Yes, 72. So after,
in reference to Chinatown. Yeah, and then Polanski's maybe 76. He's run out of the country under felony charges for raping a child.
Yeah, but get this. When he moved to France, he's doing the same thing in France. There's all these girls and kids have been victimized.
No doubt. Yeah, I mean, the only reason he didn't, he got brought up on charges, but Jack Nicholson and Bob Evans, the producer of Chinatown, the star of Chinatown, they're the ones credited with trying to clean up the mess and divert the cops. That's on record.
I mean, it's all that.
It was actually the rape allegedly occurred on Jack Nicholson's couch.
No, get this. So I think that Polanski was at Nicholson's house, and Nicholson's girlfriend was Houston's daughter.
Oh, I did not know that. But
yeah,
right,
so Angelica
they were at
Houston.
House.
Right. So Angelica Houston's with Nicholson. I mean, it becomes truth as fiction. Fiction is truth. Like, whoa.
Absolutely. And these same characters, circling back to McGowan in the 1960s, they're all intertwined in his work. Whether primarily the weird scenes inside the canyon work, right. But again, the 1960s are kind of all the same subject to a certain extent. And Polanski obviously owning the house that his fiance was murdered allegedly in the Manson family murders, and then Jack Nicholson was an actor in Hollywood and hung out with Jimi Hendrix, his best friend Jimi Hendrix, and I think Peter Tork, one of the monkeys at least. They were often
right
hanging out in Little Canyon, and Bob Evans, he's involved. He's adjacent to the Son of Sam business.
Right. So he's in the Cotton Club murders, and I learned from McGowan that Crosby was a Van Cortlandt, and some of these things, dark things, happen in Van Cortlandt Park. I mean, it's off the charts.
Oh, absolutely. And
So,
well, I mean, in regards to Son of Sam, and again, Bob Evans was deeply. I mean, he was deeply involved in the whole situation. I mean, he was trying to produce that film with Roy Radin, who was the victim who was murdered.
right.
But Evans really kind of skirted everything there. There was never any charges. He was never really questioned. It seemed he kind of just drifted off to the side, and no one really talks about him there. And he was a major Hollywood producer at the time, and I really question that. But again, the whole Son of Sam business is deeply ingrained in Thelema belief systems.
True. So it's definitely there. There's 11s, a cult, October 12th. There's just a lot of pretty sketchy things out there.
Oh,
and they really haven't.
Some of the sigils they use are straight out of Thelema, right?
Right. Well, that one sigil that they used was out of Eliphas Levi's. It's a black magic.
The main Son of Sam sigil.
Yeah. So that's very important. It's rarefied. So back in those days,
it was a Thelemite, correct?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think it was adopted possibly by the Thelemites, but it was pre-Thelema. It was definitely Eliphas Levi.
I got you.
But I mean, some of that stuff got integrated. I never saw Crowley use that black magic insignia, but he thought he was the reincarnation of Levi, so maybe that's his connection. But yeah,
I didn't know that. That's what he thought.
Crowley thought he was the resurrection of Eliphas Levi.
I think a lot of it is that's interesting. That's really interesting. I think a lot of them, when I look at Crowley, is he took a lot of the ideas and put them together, right? He kind of just mashed them together.
No question.
Various occult things.
Yeah, no question.
And as a result of that, people have kind of done that in the aftermath, right? So people have then taken those ideas and then readapted it into their new organizations, be it the Process Church of the Final Judgment.
Right. Yeah, no question. Yeah, so I mean, if you read enough, unfortunately,
same stuff.
Right. And you just see that strain, that current, the occultists would call it a current, is there, and it goes back 100 years or hundreds of years, and it gets pretty dark. Like, oh man, yeah, no, that's a whole nother show. But I've learned
absolutely.
a lot.
I'll leave you with one note referencing all that subject, though, regarding some of the Thelemic activity surrounding Son of Sam. Even is the other park that was used besides Van Cortlandt. One of their primary ritual locations was Untermeyer Park.
Right.
Which that was actually formerly owned by a man named Samuel Tilden, who was actually elected president in 1876, and was part of the deal that the South said, we'll let the North, we'll give up the presidency of the North, removes all the federal troops from the South that were under martial law for 12 years by that point. So following the Civil War. So, but Samuel Tilden, much like the rest of these people in that same group of the presidents and members of a few different secret societies that seem to venerate these mounds. That was a mound part. That location of his property had a lot of mounds on it. Ancient Indian burial mounds is the common name, obviously.
Right. I mean, it gets really dark. Yeah, Untermeyer. I mean, if you look at the history of Untermeyer, he was a big time player and attorney for Standard Oil. What's that?
He was the Federal Reserve attorney.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, very very wealthy, but also a very dark character. So you can see why the occultists are attracted to it.
I'm sure if you knew this, the Federal Reserve was also started on a mound in a ritual in South Carolina, Georgia.
I'm not surprised. What, Jekyll Island or whatever?
Yeah, the Rockefeller House on Jekyll Island is built on a mound. You can go on Wikipedia and read about it. People don't connect these things. I don't know what the occult understandings or belief systems are regarding these locations and sites, but it's there. It's an Untermeyer Park. It's relative to all the presidents. It's relative to a few of these secret societies.
Right. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Even ones that exist today in the public, for example, the International Order of Odd Fellows. I just think that I think I'd like to appreciate your time. I'd like to thank you for your time on discussing this. And I think that a lot of these occult understandings of these ideas, seem foreign to even probably us in some regards, but generally speaking, it's foreign to our society because the quote unquote magic involved. It's the same magic that these people claim to be magicians and deceive people by selling the fake moon missions by an elaborate Hollywood scheme and a very serious propaganda campaign. And when I say very serious, I mean this, and that is this. I'll leave you with this note: the Joseph Goebbels, the Nazis, NASA, the Nazis, the top NASA, or I'm sorry, the top Nazi propagandist was Joseph Goebbels,
Right.
and Joseph Goebbels' own private secretary, who spoke with him every day, who worked in his office, had no idea what was going on. And I don't say that to believe any written statements. You can see the lady doing YouTube videos at the age of, I think, nearly 100. And you could see in her face how shocked she was to learn what was actually going on amongst the Nazi Party. And it may seem like a foreign idea, but look what's going on today with the Democratic Party, the Democratic National Committee, and some of their activities intertwined with the Chinese Communist Party. People don't know it. People even in the inside don't necessarily know it. It's a need-to-know basis, very compartmentalized, and no different than things like this, the moon mission, which is why we don't know stuff today.
Right. Yeah. So JJ again, Vallibus, what's your people want to reach out to you? What's your social media or email?
Folks can reach out to me at Operation GCD at Operation GCD on Twitter or operationgcd.com, and that's garbage can dude GCD.
Gotcha. And also, if people are interested, all my documentaries are back up on Vimeo. You can just go to William Ramsey and you can get all my books at WilliamRamseyInvestigates.com. Also, if you like the show, if you like the William Ramsey Investigates, please think about going to iTunes, give me a 5-star review. I just got ranked at the top 1.5% most listened to podcasts in the world. So,
good. You should. I mean, you have an excellent podcast. I mean, I remember discovering your podcast years ago and immediately becoming a fan.
Cool, man. Well, I'm a fan of yours as well. So let's keep in touch. And if people want to follow JJ and I, we are going to read Isaac Asimov's The Foundation August 20th. So we'll discuss that. And we'd be happy to have anybody join. So looking forward to talking to you about that, JJ. Take care.
Excellent. Thanks again,
Right.
William
Cool,
Ramsey.
Cheers.